Hello and welcome, I'm Peasant, and today I'm going to do an Overexplain video for shadows. Shadows flicker like flames. So first I'm going to talk through their spirit board and their cards and kind of some hints and tips, and then I'll play an Overexplained run. So this is very much aimed at beginners. Probably if you are an experienced Spirit Island player, probably not much for you here. So move along now. Anyway, this is shadows. And they're an interesting spirit, widely perceived as underpowered, but you don't need to worry about that if you're playing at regular difficulty. And why am I saying that? Because this innate is actually great until you add adversaries into mix, because this ability here, which is a fast phase gather, you can basically use that to prevent a build chain, which is incredibly powerful. It's a very powerful ability, and a lot of the adversaries kind of nerf this in various ways. For example, exploring with more than one explorer, like France or England, kind of avoiding this, preventing this being a valid way of preventing builds. But if you're playing at relatively low difficulty, Shadows is fine. All right, he's fine. Here's a rule that's very easy to miss, and this is what kind of makes Shadows make sense. So this special rule, Shadows of the Dahan. Whenever you use a power, you may pay an energy to target a land with Dahan, regardless of the power's range. And that's with the power cards or this. Typically, you're not going to use this that much, and you're more going to be thinking about concealing shadows with that. Shadows actually is the only spirit to really receive buffs in subsequent expansions. Might be beyond the scope of this video, but this is a very powerful ability, and there's actually better versions of it that get released later on. But why do we care about using a power in a land with Dahan regardless of the power's range? Okay, well, why? Mainly because of this card here, Concealing Shadows. It's a 0 range card. So outside of using Shadows of the Dahan, you actually need a presence in that land to use it. And what it does, gives you a fear. But the main thing is that Dahan take no damage from ravaging invaders this turn. And what this means is that you can combo this with this, costing you an energy to use this ability to basically have a load of Dahan, get in a big fight, and then fight back and clear the land for you. The downside of this is it would mean that a blight is placed if 2 or more damage is done. So it's pretty funky, and to new players who are often terrified of a bit of blight going down, it's actually not necessarily obvious or desirable. But believe me, if you can get a good counterattack and clear a land, it's generally worthwhile. Almost certainly we'll see that in the game to come. Oops. Oopsie. Let's try to look at this panel here. The other thing to say is this ability here, it's actually very hard to get these later levels of this innate, but you will probably be getting the top 2 early on, and you're simply gathering to prevent build chains for the most part. You've got these growth options here, and you've actually got some pretty nice. These are actually pretty good. You don't have a particularly duff turn apart from the reclaim, which is almost always duff. General rule of thumb in this game. Most of the time, if you've got a reclaim option that doesn't allow you to place presence, you really want to avoid doing this as much as possible, because the general trajectory of a game of Spirit Island is invaders start off pretty strong, and then they will gain in power, but you generally will start weaker, and then you will power up over the course of the game. The primary way that you're powering up is by placing presence from your tracks and gaining more energy turn, having more plays, etc. So you really always want to be prioritizing your presence placement. But we'll talk more about these maybe when we're actually in the game. But notice that this track jumps here from 1 to 3. This is a big and significant jump, and this also is 3 to 3, so it's not such a nice jump. So you're going to typically want to be unlocking these first before you go charging on down these tracks. Okay, let's actually just have a little look at the hand. And we've got this, we've talked about this. Crops Wither and Fade is an interest. For a start hand, there's actually some pretty powerful things in here. So Crops Wither and Fade, you can actually replace a city with a town. That does seem a bit weird. Why would you want to do that? Well, cities in Spirit Island are actually typically a lot harder to deal with than towns. There are a lot of powers that will push towns around, but there's not much that will push cities. Certainly not in base, and you have to kind of get a few expansions in before that's something you can do. And even then, it's an expensive thing that's hard to do. So turning a city into a town is pretty valuable, as is turning a town into an explorer. You can then perhaps move them around with your innate. But also to note, 2 fear. This card, 1 fear. This card, 2 fear. This card, potentially 3 fear. So you are one of the more fear-heavy spirits. So you're probably going to be going more for a fear victory rather than a kind of wiping everyone out victory. Let's see. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the actual game. So Favors Called Due, super powerful, and gathering up to 4 Dahan, and then potentially gaining 3 fear. And that, of course, works really nicely with Concealing Shadows, because this is a good way of getting all the Dahan you need for a good counterattack. Mantle of Dread looks pretty weird. It's like a... You're targeting a spirit, so rules-wise, if you're playing with a physical copy, it is kind of different. You don't range it, so you can target any spirit in the game with it. And then you can push and explore in a town from one of your lands. So the good use of that is that, let's say you've got a presence in a land, which is the definition of one of your lands, and then they build a town in that turn, and you will know that in advance that they're going to build a town. And you target this on yourself, and they could push them out, so you don't have to worry about the Ravage next turn. Anyway, that might be enough talking in the abstract. Just realised I'm actually in the wrong screen. So here we are. We're on board D, and we have an initial explore in the jungle. So let's actually have a look at this. All right, this is actually really nice for us because we can use our innate here to gather into one range from our sacred site to prevent this build that's going to happen this turn. So that is kind of what you want with this spirit. So in order to get this threshold, we're going to need 2 moons and a fire. So looking at the start cards we have up here, you'll notice that we have 2 moon fire cards and we have 2 moon but not fire cards. So you don't really want to play Crops Wither and Mantle of Dread on the same turn. You don't really want to do that. So, interesting. We've actually got some options here. Because if we get this double moon fire, which I will aim to do, we could prevent this build here. And we could push this explorer somewhere we could rather it went. We alternatively could use Mantle of Dread to push the town after it's built this turn. And we know it's going to be built this turn because we've got a card down there. I mean, those are both viable options. But if we go with the Mantle of Dread push, then we're not going to want to Crops Wither and Fade this turn. Because we want to be getting this ability, because preventing a whole build chain is a really big deal. It's not. I don't think it's immediately apparent to some new players, but it's definitely something you want to do. So I'm just kind of working out. So it's going to be one of these 2 and then one of these 2. Now, Favors Called Due, gather up to 4 Dahan, and then potentially gain some fear. So we could gather these 3 in here, and that's actually perfect, because we're then going to outnumber the invaders. And gain 3 fear, because we'll have a total of 4 Dahan and they will have only 2 invaders. Now, this is an Overexplain run with the Branch and Claw content, so it is a bit different to the 0 run. This is a disease token. All this does just prevents one build and then is removed. So we know that there isn't going to be a town built in here. So my plan, I think, is going to be to Favors Called Due, gather all these in here, thinking for a Concealing Shadows next turn. So that means this turn we could go Mantle of Dread. I mean, 2 fear is a lot of fear. Or we could go Crops Wither and Fade, which is also 2 fear. Which makes me think, if I go with this, I actually have the opportunity to maybe remove this town. Now, what's the benefit of that? I hear you asking. Well, when the invaders get to the explore phase, if there are no buildings adjacent, or you can't do anything about the coast, that's always going to be there. But if there are no buildings adjacent, then you will just prevent and explore. And you know how I'm advocating for preventing builds? Preventing explores is even better. Hard to believe, I know. So I want to be Favors Called Due, and I want to be Crops Wither and Fade, especially as Mantle of Dread is providing a service that is completely surplus to requirements this turn, because we can deal with this anyway. Okay, so in order to do that, I need 2 energy, and it's a bit grim that Shadow starts with 0 energy a turn. It's a bit grim. Also, to bear in mind, to get to play both, I do need to actually uncover the second play. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this growth option and I'm going to uncover the second play so I could do both of those. That could be unnecessary, but I like the fact I'm preventing this build here. So, as I'm going to be using crops wither and fade, I need to be at 0 range, and ranging is often the most tricky thing, one of the trickiest things for me. So I'm thinking what I'll do, I need to place a presence so that I can use crops wither and fade at 0 range, and that wants to go in here. And the reason I'm not paying attention to here is because once I've gathered all these Dahan in here, this land is taken care of. I don't need to worry about this land in future because these guys are not going to be around. So I'm going to go with the plan. So we've got the first tier of our innate here. We've got all that stuff going on. So now we've chosen our cards and now we're into the fast phase. So we've got this fast gather. So the fact it's fast is pretty critical because it means that we're gathering before the build. So it's a gather at 1 range from a sacred site. So I could gather into any of these because these are adjacent to my sacred site. And I'm inclined to want to gather towards the coast. Just as a general rule. But I think in this case it doesn't actually matter that much. Just doesn't matter. So I think I'm going to gather... Yeah, I'm just going to go with the general rule of gathering towards the coast. And that's because if you can clear the inland, you can end up with a nice... a situation where you have fewer explorers to worry about. So we've gathered away from there. And so that means there's no build in this jungle because there's nothing in there. And this build here was prevented because of the disease that will start. Every time you start a branch and explore game, there will be a disease token in that coastal land. If you're playing with your physical copy, it won't be printed on there, but, you know, just trust. So what's our invade card? It's a sand. Okay, then. So... with slow, what part of the reason slow powers are super powerful is that you can kind of immediately respond to this flip. So we might want to change our plan based on the flip, but I don't think we do in this case. I think I still want to remove this town with crops wither and fade, and I still want a favors called due in here. So nothing has changed there, but bear in mind that your common rules mistake is to think that you have to decide what you're doing with these. I mean, I think it's good to plan what you're doing with them, but you don't have to actually make a firm decision. So I'm going to bring these in here, which gets me the 3 fear because I'm now outnumbering, and we're going to be counterattacking pretty nicely next turn. And then crops wither and fade in here. So we've downgraded that town into an explorer and gained a couple of fear, and we've got our first fear card there. And we're back to our growth phase. So this turn, we have a Ravage here, and we have a Ravage here. Now, we're going to use the Concealing Shadows, even though it's going to cost us a Blight. But to target in there, I either am going to have to spend an energy to use my Shadows of the Dahan ability, because there are Dahan in there, or I could just place a presence in there. You can do it however you like. I'd say as a general rule when playing with events, you want to be more careful with presence than generally. But you've got to live your own way. So in order to play this with the targeting and this, I need 2 energy. So I'm probably gonna play this, look at a power card, and gain an energy. And actually, Mantle of Dread here is going to be useful. So pushing and exploring a town from one of the lands. So like, for example, this one, we could push the town that's going to be built this turn, and then there's just a lone explorer in there. Now, events can mean that a lone explorer is a problem when in base they're not, but it's most of the time you're still okay. So I think this turn just looks good, but we do want to gain power cards, and we want to also talk about power cards. But actually, it would be good just to gain a power card here. So, when you have the choice of... It's always better to look at the power card before you make any decisions about your presence. Obviously, in the physical game, doesn't matter too much. But in the digital game, you might regret a decision there, because unless you enable a specific rule in the digital game, you won't be able to undo past seeing new information. So here we go. What minor power have we been given here? So let's talk a little bit about minor powers or gaining powers. Now, most of the time, your minor power choice is largely about getting thresholds on your innate. In this scenario against a difficulty zero confrontation, this innate is actually still really good. So I am prioritizing getting moon and fire if I can. Let's see, have we been offered any moon fire? We've not really been offered any moon fire. Okay. So I tend to go with what's a good card for me for my innate and long term. And then it's more like, okay, what's going to help me right here, right now? What is going to help me? Something else has just occurred to me. And that is that in here, you'll notice that there's a city and an explorer. Now, if we just let this Ravage go, they would do 4 damage to the land and to the Dahan. 2 Dahan would die, and then the 2 remaining Dahan would counterattack and clear this land. I could gamble that the event isn't going to ruin my day and just let this go, with this land taking care of itself. I'm not sure that's a good idea. But the advantage of doing that is I could then play something that wasn't Concealing Shadows. I could, for example, play Entrancing Apparitions, which would give me the moon I need to also do this ability. But you'll notice here, these explorers are actually doubled up, because so my innate here is not going to actually prevent a build chain. All of a sudden, my innate, we've seen our innate go from awesome to oh. But Entrancing Apparitions does give us the ability to gather too, so we could do that. And I think actually this is low-key one of the best cards in the game. Because you can so often prevent 2 build chains with this by gathering 2 explorers from 2 different lands. So I think I am going to pick this. And do I gamble on that? Do I gamble? It is a bit gambly. But it is a horrible gamble. But I want to prevent these builds, so I am going to gamble here. Why not? Let's make the game much harder for myself with the gamble. So I need to place from the energy track, otherwise I am not going to have the energy to do anything. So again, we want to think about our targeting. Currently, we have a sacred site kind of in or adjacent to all of these lands, but we're kind of not really covering this land or this land. So I'm going to make a sacred site in here. Even though it's not going to matter this turn, it might matter for future turns. I'm going to use Mantle of Dread probably to push the town out of here. So we've already got a presence in there. So I'm going to put this in here to make a sacred site in there, I think. It feels a bit dubious. Slightly dubious. And I'm going to gamble that nothing's going to affect here. So I could end up in trouble there. There are a certain number of event cards that will, for example, make the invaders do more damage. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see if I get punished. Okay. So this Darkness Swallows the Unwary is actually... Oh, we could yoink an Explorer out of here just to make this slightly safer from the events. Okay, so in the fast, I'm going to use Entrancing Apparitions to gather up to 2 explorers from this land, preventing the build in there. Oh, no, from this land, sorry. So I'm going to drag them into here. And that's going to prevent the build in this area. And then, so currently this is 4 damage, I'm actually going to gather this Explorer from here. Which just makes this, so it's 3 damage. So if nothing else changes, we're only going to have 1 Dahan dying. This is it's a bit mercenary. But here we go. So we're into our event. We're only at Fear level 1. Add an Explorer to land without invaders or Dahan. That's fine. Beasts are going to destroy an explorer, and then each spirit with at least 3 Dahan amongst lands may use a slow power now. Okay, so we've got to add an explorer somewhere on the board, and typically it's nice if you can add explorers somewhere where they will, immediately die. So, for example, if they're about to ravage somewhere with Dahan to counterattack, that's nice, because once you've seen the event, you're not going to get any more bad news that turn, so you kind of know where you are. But we don't have that situation, so I'm just going to put it somewhere. Okay, we know that a beast is going to destroy an explorer. Let's just put it in with the beast. There you go. And then we've got ourselves a fear card. Each player adds a strife in a land with or adjacent to a beast. So a strife. Okay, that was the only option there, that city. So we've actually the game has just saved us from taking a blight. What a strife does, it prevents a one-off. You put it on. So all the other tokens you just put on the space, but the strife goes on a particular invader. And then it will basically prevent the damage from the ravage. The ravage will still take place, but it just will do 0 damage. So the Dahan still counterattacked and cleared it. So we kind of got lucky there. We got very lucky. Okay, so Wetland Explore, and now we have the Mantle of Dread. So I'm going to do what I said I was going to do, which is to target myself, gain some fear, and now I can push a town and explorer from my land. So if I push this town and this explorer, then in the ravage next turn, it's going to be a 1 damage ravage, i.e. a single explorer, which is fine. It won't place a blight. It won't destroy the Dahan. It will damage the Dahan, but it won't destroy them. An event might influence that, but generally it won't. So we're going to push from here, and we know that there's going to be a build here on the coast, so we don't really want to push in there, because if we push this town in there, then they'll build a city, and cities are harder for us to deal with. So I'm going to want to push into this mountain or this jungle. I don't really like that I've piled all these explorers in here, but it's still better than having an extra build chain. I'm going to push this explorer into here, I think. I'm going to build a horrible stack. And I'm trying to think if I've got a good excuse for that. The reason I'm doing this is, what it means is that if we get a mountain, we're sad. But if we get anything else, there's not, we're not making those harder. Don't know if that makes much sense, but that's what I'm saying. So, we're back to the spirit phase. We've got a growth option to pick. We have a ravage here that's fine. They'll do a damage, but no blight will go down, and then the land will clear. Then we have a town build here and a town build here. So, if we are able to trigger our innate, these are lone explorers, so we could prevent one of those builds. And if we could get to here, we could gain some fear as well. Okay, here is a textbook example of where Entrancing Apparitions is great. So if there are no invaders present, gather up to 2 explorers. We can actually use Entrancing Apparitions in here to prevent both of these builds, which is sick and wrong. So I'm going to do that. I think, because that's a lot of prevention. If we didn't have such a good play this turn, I would be tempted to maybe push on, gain a power card or something. But especially as Concealing Shadows is doing nothing for us this turn, I think that's still okay. We are still very poor for energy though. And we have no 0 cost cards. So we might, it's not actually ideal. We might be better off doing this just to get to 3 energy. But preventing 2 builds is wonderful. It's truly wonderful. So I'm doing it. This might just be an inaccuracy, and this is probably better. But we are going to gain a minor power card. And hopefully we'll get something useful that costs 0. Okay, we've been given useful cards that cost 0. So again, what are we considering? We like Moonfire cards for the sake of our innate. In this particular situation, I've gone for preventing 2 build chains with Entrancing Apparitions, but at the great cost of becoming more poor. This Gift of Constancy, aside from being one of my favorite cards, gives you 2 energy. So this is perfect for this situation. It also means I can reuse reclaim a power card instead of discarding it, which means we could either reclaim itself if we're feeling poor, or we could just get our entrancing apparitions back. So this is almost certainly what I'm going to pick. Let's look at everything else briefly. Delusions of Danger is pretty good. It's basically our innate. This push here is kind of functionally the same as a gather. And Fast Fear is also pretty nice. And why is that the case? Because if you get Fear in the fast phase, you'll actually get to use the Fear cards that turn before the invader actions. So that's the value of the Fast Fear. It's pretty good. Speron with Words of Fire is pretty funky. It's pretty funky. We're getting more into wombo combo territory. Target spirit may immediately play another power card by paying its cost. Pretty cool. Not that relevant for us here because we're not really gaining powers mid-turn. Reaching Grasp is for some spirits it's amazing. For we don't really care though. We don't care. So we're going to go Gift of Constancy, and we are broke. We are broke. So we're going to go with this. So none of us, we're pretending that we are mists right now. We are a constant mist. So Gift of Constancy, I'm going to target myself, gaining 2 energy, and then we're going to target in here, and we're going to prevent both of these build chains. So it's kind of a typical atypical run here with Shadows. So, farmers seek the Dahan for aid. The Dahan are uncertain whether to teach the invaders farming techniques more in tune with the island's life. You recommend we can spurn those invaders. 2 damage to Dahan and land with buildings and Dahan. Add a blight to a land with at least 2 buildings. I don't think we've... Oh, no. I don't think we actually have that problem. This might be our option. Or, on each board, add a town to land with Dahan, and next Ravage becomes a build. Almost certainly we want this option. Because, yeah, so sometimes this happens where the event is just almost exclusively beneficial. 2 damage to Dahan land with buildings. We don't have that situation. This is purely beneficial. We do have a disease going to land with Dahan and invaders, so that will affect in there. So we are spurning. No lands. No lands. And we do have to add a disease somewhere. Let's add a disease in here, because this is quite a nice stack for our Favours Called Due. And we have a Fear card. Each player may push an Explorer into a land with more buildings than the land it came from. As this Explorer is going to die in the Ravage, I'm going to leave them where they are. And it is a may. We're not forced to do it. There are a lot of Explorers in here. We may as well add another. I don't think that's particularly relevant. And we have wetland builds, but we don't because there's no one in there. And our Explore. Mountain. Okay, well, that'll teach me for stacking everything in the mountain. You'll notice that there was no Explorer in this mountain because there weren't any buildings in either of these lands. Which is the benefit of kind of clearing the interior. So now we're going to get to reclaim... a card. And we might be getting towards the end. So we are currently 3 fear away from getting this fear card, which will mean we could potentially win by eliminating all the buildings. That might be a good potential spot to win at. So what we could do is we could maybe Favours Called Due this turn and bring all these Dahan in here for counterattack in a future turn to clear this. Or even... Because the trouble with this is we don't really have the tools to deal with it. Do we have a use for Entrancing Apparitions this turn? Not really. So I'm going to reclaim Gift of Constancy. And we are back to the growth phase. So no Ravage this turn, a city build here, no build here, and then something else. So we're now into the stage 2 cards. So we kind of, all we know about these cards is that we're not going to get another mountain. We're either going to get one of the other lands or we're going to get a coastal lands explore. So I think, we could Crops Wither and Fade. to replace the city with a town. Don't think that actually makes much odds. I think I am going to pile them in here, and it's going to be ugly, because if we do use Concealing Shadows, this will be a blight landing on a blight, so it will be a cascade. But it might just be glorious. So we want to do that next turn when the mountain is ravaging. So we want to do Favours Called Due this turn. We're not going to get the Fear, unfortunately, because there's already some idiot put a load of Explorers in there. So we're doing this turn, and we actually don't even care about our innate because we've got no builds to prevent, no preventable builds. So, I mean, we probably just want to gain some kind of generic fear. But we definitely want to get to this bit on the energy track. And we could gain a power card here. And that's partly because our energy problems are about to be over for now. And we actually don't really have anything that good to do on our turn, apart from the Favours Called Due. So we've kind of got a second action to do, nothing great to do with it. So we could gain a minor power here or a major power. We wouldn't probably be able to use the major power, but we could kind of plan for it. I'm going to gain a minor power, I think, and we're probably going to play this, but we may even end up playing that. We'll see. So we're going to gain a minor power. We like Moons and Fire. We've not been offered any Moon Fire cards. Not today. Okay, this might be good for us, because it's a slow power, so we can kind of respond to the Explore, and kind of destroy an Explorer that's kind of landed somewhere. Call of Dahan Ways is also pretty nice, and we should easily be able to get this threshold here. Fire in the Sky is also, I mean, these are all good options. This is more fear than we probably need. Extreme close up. But I feel like I've already got a good plan here, which is Favours Called Due, drag a load of Dahan in here, and then set up for a big counterattack to clear this land. In the meantime, the Ravage will happen before the build next turn, so we should still be able to win with that strategy. So I actually think I'm going to just try and press forward for the win. Interestingly, if I Call of Dahan Ways this turn on this town, that would actually slow down our win. Maybe even prevent our win. Because by replacing this, we won't get the fear from destroying the town. The calculation I'm making is, this turn they're going to build a city. And then during the counter attack on the subsequent turn, we will destroy the town and the city. Now, destroying a town is 1 fear and a city is 2 fear, which will get us the fear we need to get this card and then get to Terra 2. I mean, it's all mildly academic, because we could probably just get some fear from playing Crops Wither and Fade, for example. So there's that. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this, with Rouse the Trees and Stones, and we're going to place from the energy track. So, weirdly, we're not in or adjacent to here or here. So I'm going to start placing with a view to making a sacred site in one of these lands. Let's put one down here. And, okay, so Favours Called Due to set up this big, hopefully winning counter ravage, and then Rouse the Trees and Stones. And you notice we've not gone with our innate, but it's not doing anything for us this turn. And we can use this to respond to any explorers in these areas. We're not going to be able to use it down here or in here, because we don't have an adjacent sacred site. Okay. Alright, so event card. Healthy Iron. During the next normal ravage, each town does an extra damage. That doesn't matter to us. Each beast destroys one, add a beast to a land without one, and on each board add a Dahan. Okay, we didn't have a choice there, so we added on that coastal jungle. Wetland Ravage doesn't matter. Mountain build is the city in here, and have a Wetland Explore. Okay, so we can Favours Called Due in here to set up for our big counter ravage. And I'm actually going to favour bringing this lone Dahan in from there. I think generally Dahan on their own are a little bit more vulnerable to events. And so they're set up for the counterattack next turn. And then we can rouse the trees and stones to kind of respond to this explore, which means that we don't have to worry about the build next turn in here. And why do we care about the build? Because we're trying to clear the island of buildings, so we don't want those buildings. So we can continue with our plan to concealing shadows, and we can prevent this build as long as we've got a sacred site in here. And that matters because of using this ability here. And we also need to play a moon fire card. So either of these, and we should be golden. So I'm going to kind of rush to the end because I think we have the victory. So there's our sacred site. There's the concealing shadows we need. It's going to be a little bit messy in there, but it's going to be fine. And we'll play the third one because we can. Okay. So fast phase, we are concealing shadows in here. And we're going to prevent this build in here. So I'm going to gather this in. And then we actually have the second tier on here, which would destroy both of these. And we'll get a couple of fear. So now we are in a position where we'll win if there are no more buildings. Okay, the event could wreck my little plan. Let's see. Missionaries arrive. They teach and spread lessons of a foreign god. You may ignore their contact with the Dahan. For each board, discard the top minor power. If it has sun, push an explorer from a land with Dahan. Otherwise, replace a Dahan with a town. So this would wreck my little plan. Because it would replace one of my fighting Dahan with a town. So yeah, we don't want that. Though we do have crops wither and fade sat in our slow, so we could actually downgrade a town subsequently. And then we've got this option here. So curse the tongues of the foreigners. Cost 4 energy per player, aided by sun. Quick rundown of how aid works. Basically, for every, in this example, every sun element you have in play from cards will kind of count as an energy towards this. And then any subsequent energy you can pay with actual energy from your bank, or by discarding a card with that element, that will gain you 2 energy towards this cost, or forgetting a card would be 4 energy. So, pretty good. All right, So, if we go with this option, we'll add a Z's to a land with a city, 2 fear per player, and then during next normal damage, cities do +3 damage. So, in this case, the extra damage doesn't matter, because Concealing Shadows means that it doesn't matter how much damage they're doing. So I'm going to go with this option here. Almost always, if you're paying, it's a better option. And this is a cleaner way of doing it. So I'm going to curse those tongues. And I've got lots of ways to do it. This is discarding this makes sense because we don't have a good turn next turn. And then I could just pay the energy. I mean, could have forgot it as well. Kind of academic at this point. Okay, we do have a fear card. Invaders do not build in lands where Dahan outnumber buildings. So that actually does prevent the build in here. And then we have the Mountain Ravage. And we do have a Cascade. We'll Cascade up here. And then we counterattack. So we have now cleared all of the buildings from the map, which is the victory. So that was an Overexplained run. I hope it was helpful to newer players. If you have any comments or feedback, feel free to put them down. And if it's relevant, a timestamp is wonderful. If you like the video, like the video. And if you have any questions about Spirit Island, I'm very happy to try and answer them because I love this game. I love this game. You could look at the details. Don't often look in here. But yeah, that was a kind of interesting run because although we did use the illusions quite a lot, we basically were doing shadow stuff. We were preventing build chains. And we did see, a bit of gratuitous extra blighting on the island there. So that will please any regulars. All right. Well, until next time, keep it spiritual. And yeah, any questions, fire away. Cheers.